Welcome to Revenue Rehab, your one-stop destination for collective solutions to the biggest challenges faced by marketing leaders today. Now head on over to the couch, make yourself comfortable, and get ready to change the way you approach revenue. Leading your recovery is modern marketer, author, speaker, and chief operating officer at Tegrita, Brandi Starr.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Revenue Rehab. I am your host, Brandi Starr, and we have another amazing episode for you today. I am joined by Alex Levin. Alex is the co-founder and CEO of Regal Voice, where he leads the go-to-marketing teams. Prior to Regal Voice, Alex was a product manager at Personal and Thomson Reuters, and then joined Handy as an early employee. Alex grew up in New York and received his BA from Harvard. Alex, welcome to Revenue Rehab. Your session begins now.
Hey, thank you for having me.
I am excited to talk to you. I always love to hear about those journeys and how everyone progresses through their careers. But before we jump into that, I like to break the ice with a little woo-saw moment that I call buzzword banishment. So tell me, what buzzword would you like to get rid of forever?
So I was asking my wife about this, and she gave me a bunch, but so she has even a stronger opinion. But there's one that's always bothered me. For some reason, I hate being called a millennial. So I know it's anybody who was born sort of post 1982, 83, which includes me, through whatever it was 90s at some point. But for some reason, like there's this generational idea of like, oh, millennials all behave like this. Millennials do that. Millennials in the workforce want this thing. And I guess it's like any of these sort of fake made up groups that really are not connected to anything are obviously going to be incorrect. But, as a marketer, I try not to make that mistake. And like, I always sort of, get a little annoyed whenever people start talking about, oh, as a millennial, I must believe X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, I am with you on that one. And I think my biggest issue with the term millennial is it has grown to just be used to reference young people. And it's like technically millennials are like close to 40 now. Yeah. So it's not the 20 something just entering the workforce. So it's like, people aren't even using it accurately. Like they're really referring to like Gen Z and Gen A when they're saying millennials. So I'm with you there in terms of it's a really misleading term. So I will not refer to you as a millennial during this conversation, and we will put millennials in the box and not talk about it, at least for the next half hour or so. So now that we've gotten that off our chest, you are here on the couch as a part of the My Journey series. And for those who have not listened to any of the My Journey episodes, this is an opportunity for me to talk to senior leaders who have taken a less than traditional path through their careers, because I think something that each of us, as we take a role, each role really shapes you, and you learn different things about yourself and your talents and what you like and what you never want to do again. And so sometimes it sends us in interesting directions. And so that is one reason why I started this series. After you listen to my conversation with Alex, feel free to go back to episodes 35, 37, and 41, where I talk to others about their journey. But Alex, I want to start with a really simple question, which is, when you were a kid, what did you think you were going to be when you grew up?
Oh, it's a great question. I guess from a relatively young age, I understood I'd be somewhere in the business world. My father ran a small business, and, it's not that he brought everything to the dinner table. We kind of understood that like there was something happening where, he had the complexities and highs and lows of business. There was sort of no specifics within that. So it wasn't like I understood anything what business meant at that age, but I think I kind of got that. when I went to college, I went to a liberal arts school, and I studied philosophy and psychology. And for a while, I thought about going into academia, and I just found it was so isolating, and it just wasn't something I was really that interested in doing for years, and not engaging with other human beings at all. And so eventually came back to the idea of going into more sort of some kind of business role.
Okay. Yeah, it's really interesting. I also thought that I wanted to teach in a college setting. I got my undergrad in marketing and my graduate degree in adult education with the intent of teaching marketing in a college setting. And after I got the degree, much like you, started looking at it, and it was like, this is not actually the life I want to live. And
Right.
so I jumped the fence and went with consulting because it's kind of teaching adults, but without the traditional academia. So I definitely can relate there. And I know for you, you started in product and then have progressed to being a CEO. So kind of talk about, some of your career progression and how you've navigated that. Give us the big picture of your overall career history.
Yeah, sure. So, when I was in undergrad, a lot of the recruiting for sort of business type roles was from banks and consulting companies. That was really all that was offered. And I actually look back at it, and I think it's something that some of the sort of big liberal arts schools do very badly, is that they don't present the full swath of the kind of business roles that really exist, because they're bringing onto campus, Goldman Sachs, and they're bringing McKinsey, but they're not bringing everything else. So, I applied to a bunch of those sorts of roles, and I actually worked for an investment bank. This was a while ago, and I thought the work was fascinating, actually. But in my case, there were a lot of people on the teams that I worked for that didn't like the work, and it wasn't what they wanted to be doing. They were only there for the money, and I thought, this is not a great place to work, because people are not having fun. They're not doing what they want to be doing. They're doing this only for one reason. It wasn't necessarily the wrong reason. I wanted to make sure I was somewhere with people that actually enjoyed their work. So, as part of that realization, I started looking at other business roles myself, without sort of any of the career recruiting, and found that, what really interested me the most was all these technology businesses. And I'd read some of this. There was an article back in sort of, I can't remember exactly the year, but in that time period, where Mark Andreessen said, software is eating the world. Every business would become a software business. And I intrinsically just understood that that was to be the case, that if you wanted to be an exec at a company in the future, you had to understand how software is built, what software did, because every business was going to be a software business. So relatively early in my career, I started working for, to your point, roles where I could be in technology companies, where I could learn how product was built as a product manager. Turns out I'm not a great product manager. I'm an okay product manager. I'm fine at it, but we're much better product managers. So I switched more into commercial roles, which I was much better at, where, I understood the economics of different parts of businesses, how to go to market, how to, make customers successful. And so ultimately I switched more into those kind of roles. But I think, whenever people, tell me they want to eventually be an executive at a large modern company, I make the same point of, they're not going to allow you to, run the company, whatever, drive the car, unless you are a technologist, because that is the core piece of every company in the future. So early in your career, go learn that stuff. If you didn't go to undergrad for engineering, go get roles where you can learn how to build product.
I really like that because, that is one of those things when for someone who's starting out in their career, if they know their ultimate goal is to reach the C-suite, a lot of people don't really think about the variety of experience that you really need to be effective in that. Like, no matter what, that line is, it's not a direct, like, oh, I want to head marketing one day, so the only thing I've ever done is marketing, or I want to be the CEO, so I've only really got to be good at finance or, strategy. Like, there are so many of those different experiences that lend well to it. And I like what you said around the importance for you of actually enjoying the work and working with people that enjoy the work, and having the self-awareness to recognize that, like, I'm getting this job done, but I'm not that great at it. Let me figure out how to pivot. And so I'd like to dig into that first pivot a little bit in how did you recognize that that was just kind of a meh role for you? Like, what were some of those self-awareness things that made you understand that there was that it was a time for a shift?
Yeah, it sort of happened naturally for me, but the reason I wanted to become a product manager was to learn how you wrote product specs, how engineering teams figured out what to build, how the thing was actually built from the inside. And it gave me a front row seat to that, and it was fantastic. And I did a lot of my own sort of research and learning outside of work, but it got me to a place where I'm not saying I'm an engineer, I'm not, but I could certainly sort of speak up if something was going in the wrong direction. I understood enough to understand kind of right or wrong or different directions. I think what I also came to understand is to be a great product manager requires, just a deep desire to spend time, diagramming out all the different possible ways which the product could work or not work. And, writing these specs wasn't that exciting to me. What was more exciting to me was how customers were going to use it and how we were going to commercialize what customers are doing with that. And so I'd find myself being, pulled more in that direction in conversation and less in the other. And, different orgs call these things different things, but I eventually knew that I didn't want to be the one writing all the technical documents, doing all of that piece, because it wasn't what I was most passionate about. And I wanted to find a way more into the commercial side. And so it was, again, a little bit unusual. I wasn't sure what kinds of roles I should take, but eventually found roles more on the commercial side in business development and in general management and, and being a P&L owner and eventually like running marketing and growth teams where, even though, let's say I wasn't an expert in any one of those topics, by sort of playing those different roles over time, I gained the expertise necessary to, be somebody running a bigger part of a business. And so by the time at ANGI, I was running hundreds of millions of dollars in P&L where we had, all these different teams working on the projects that I was in charge of. I had a much better insight into what each team was doing. And so it definitely, at the time felt a bit haphazard, the different roles I was playing. But by the end, I'd learned a lot.
Yeah, and I think that is also something key as you navigate your career. And I know something that I struggled with early on in my career is being okay with that haphazard progression. Like in some cases, at least I know growing up, I was always taught about very linear progressions. That was a time in life when people would, work for one company their whole career. And it was like, you do this and then you move to that role. And then, it was like this incremental, very linear career approach. And it took me some time to really actually get comfortable with like, I can make these weird zigzags and, hop on this different path and hop back, and that these aren't bad things. So what were some of because, there's obviously the business learnings, but going through having all those different commercial roles, what were some of the personal learnings and takeaways that you were able to gain?
A lot of different companies. I mean, a couple stories that I often tell. So one, I worked for a much larger technology company called Thomson Reuters at one point, and I was going to leave and go to a smaller startup. And I went to a person who had been my boss for a while, and I said, look, I'm going to go to this small company. And he takes me aside and he goes, you know what, like, yes, I understand we're a bigger technology company, might feel like a big ship. And turning a big ship takes a lot of effort, but when you do, it impacts a lot of people. You're going to go to this little startup and, it's going to feel like you're moving things really fast, but the reality is you're not impacting anybody. And I actually thought it was the quintessential misunderstanding of technology companies. The promise of technology is that a very small company, very few people, can both move fast and impact a lot of people. And so it only sort of redoubled my desire to get out of this larger organization somewhere where I thought you could do both the speed and the impact. So that's one sort of thought I give people. I think another one that I learned throughout is you're taught, maybe from movies or books or just popular culture that, the more senior person, has a lot of organization reporting to them. Many people work for them, and that's what makes them important, or like, senior in an organization. And at some point, I worked for somebody who I think made a good point that I believe in strongly now, which is that shouldn't be the goal. The goal shouldn't be how many people work for you. It shouldn't be empire building. That's actually like a sign of failure in some cases. The most successful people in organizations are able to take a challenging problem. So the problem might be, hey, we need to enter a new market, or it might be, hey, we need to improve our marketing, or it might be, let's go and figure out how to build a new product. But they can take that challenge, and with it might come some people that report to them. With it might come no people, but structure the problem, figure out the levers, move in the direction that you want to go in, and then extricate themselves. And actually, the most successful people are the ones who can, whether the team reports to them or not, make it so that team no longer needs them at all, right? Make it so that if I were hit by a bus, so to speak, that team could completely run on its own. Why is that important? Well, that means that you've actually enabled yourself to go do the next thing. So what would happen often, I'd see in sort of friends' careers, is they'd go to some company and they make themselves completely indispensable in a role. And then they'd ask for a promotion. And guess what? Well, they don't want to promote you when you're indispensable in a role, because they can't take you out of the role that you're in. They make it harder for themselves to get promoted. So the trick is to both solve the problem and create a system such that it can be repeated without you, with either technology, some process, or other people, ideally who are going to be paid less than you, let's say, because you've now made the problem easier and they don't need to hire as talented a person, and you can go on and do the next. So that shift in mentality from empire building to making yourself redundant is actually a critical one, I think, to being successful in a modern workforce today.
I love that, because I do think that there is this mentality of, I need to create, it's almost like creating job security. If no one can do what I do, then that means they've got to retain me. They've got to, value me, and all these sorts of things, which as an individual contributor, I kind of get it. Not necessarily that I agree, but I at least get it. But you're right. When you are in a leadership role, success is having people, whether they report to you directly or, indirectly, be able to deliver in your absence. Because I see so many executives that get bogged down too much in the weeds that they can't actually be effective at what they need to be effective in, because they don't have that well-oiled machine, or those people that, that make you redundant.
Yeah.
So that is really, really sound advice there.
And there's phases to it. I'm not suggesting you make yourself, redundant day one. It's important day one to dig in, understand all the details, figure out what the levers are, then do it yourself and prove that it can be done. And then once people start believing, hand it off to other people. I think the other thing that we believe in a lot, my co-founder and I, is even when you're a manager, you should be taking 20% of your time and doing the IC job that works for you. Why? Well, a lot of, one, by doing the work that you're assigning, basically, you can see what stupid things you're assigning. Because often, you're asking people to do silly things. You don't realize unless you do it yourself. Two, by doing it, you're continuing to get the feedback much faster about what's happening from a customer, if it's a customer thing, or from the code base, if it's a code base. There's nothing that's going to get you feedback as fast as you doing it. If you have other people do it, sure, they'll eventually tell you, but much slower. And then last, it brings a lot of respect from your team if they see that you're also doing the same thing. You're pulling an oar, or you're doing it perhaps even better than the rest, so that they have somebody to go and look at. So it's not that you have to be better than the people that work for you, but it I think goes a long way to show that you can actually do it yourself and you care enough to do it yourself. So even in a world where you become, make yourself redundant, you should still be doing some of it just to stay, very connected to it. And then, make a decision about where your time is best spent. If you're a small business owner and the most important thing for your business are these 5 accounts, even if you've created a good process, you're going to spend a lot of your time on those 5 accounts. If you're a founder, the great part about having a founder in a business is that there's going to be nobody ever who's as crazy detail oriented as a founder, who's going to be obsessed with all these little things as a founder. to your point, sometimes it can slow things down, but a lot of times, like, that's what keeps businesses alive, is somebody who's so insane that they're going to like focus on every little detail.
Which is a good segue, because I want to talk about you being the founder of Regal Voice. Talk about how that came to be. How did you move from, working in a corporate or small business setting to actually founding your company?
So both my co-founder and I had worked for technology companies, and we'd known each other a long time, but on our own, we'd come to the realization we wanted to be entrepreneurs. And not everybody does. You have to be a little bit insane to be an entrepreneur. You're going on completely on your own, and there's going to be roller coaster up and downs, but you believe in something enough that you want to go and do it. So we come to that realization, and then realized we wanted to do it together, which is a very important step. Like, find a co-founder, and not just somebody you meet on Reddit like for 5 minutes. Like, truly find somebody that you're going to work with for years, and that's very complementary to your skill set. And then, as we started going through the different businesses that we liked, we found one that both of us were very interested in, and dug into that one. And so I think that's a very typical set of steps that people should go through, at least as they get into it. The next thing I recommend to people is don't just go and try to raise money, whether it's debt or equity, whatever it is. Spend some time proving to yourself that this is a business that you want to spend 10 years in. And what's going to prove that to you? Well, prove that it's a viable business economically. That's important. Prove that it's something you're going to stay interested in for 10 years, because whether you know it or not now, you're going to have to say exactly the same thing for the next 10 years of your life on repeat. So, like, if you don't like it, then that's not a good sign. So prove that. And then, spend some time understanding the kind of people that you're going to work with if this succeeds. I think that last one is something that people don't think about enough. You can have a very successful trucking business or logistics business where you do very well, and maybe you're very interested in it, but maybe the type of people you can hire are very different. You're not going to get the ex-McKinsey and BCG consultants necessarily working for you. On the other hand, in a business like ours, which is a VC-backed high-growth technology company, we can attract the top X whatever best schools, best work environment folks who are very high horsepower and excited to work on this project with us. So I think you decide what matters to you. For us, ultimately, what mattered is obviously we wanted an economically viable business. We found one. We realized that it was something we were passionate about and could spend time with, because not only were we selling the product to companies, but it ultimately massively impacted their end user. So we sell software that these big organizations use to help their end customers, buy their products. So SoFi, for instance, uses us to also talk to their customers and get them to refinance their student loans, as an example. And then on the last one, it was very clear we'd be able to attract very high-end talent, which was important to us because we wanted to work with that kind of person every day, because we wanted to have a company that really cared about the thing we were doing and move forward very quickly. And so we started the business, and now we're 3 years in. We've been very lucky, on all accounts, that it's gone more or less to plan.
Okay, yeah. And the one thing that I hear in taking away what you want your business environment to be, and understanding that, like, attracting top talent is a thing that's important. I think that's a really key thing, whether someone is pursuing entrepreneurship or even just choosing your next role in, where you want to lead. Like, what is that environment that you want to be in? Do you want to work for a company where you are attracting the best of the best? Do you want to work in an environment where, that startup environment where everybody's got that entrepreneurial mindset, but they may not be as, top tier talent by all the standards? It's like all those sorts of things I do think is important when you are crafting that career journey, not just when starting a business. I definitely think it's way more important when you're starting a business, but just for those that are not, those listening that are not in that mindset as well, I think that is a takeaway that is important also. And so my last question that I always like to ask, although the majority of our listeners are already senior leaders, I do always like to get some advice for those early in their career. So for those who are kind of in those early roles, figuring out where they want to go, what advice would you offer them?
Yeah, so a couple things. I saw an interview from Obama recently where somebody was asking him, like, what, when you were hiring all these people, like, what matters most? And I loved his answer. He was a little more circuitous than I'm going to be, but basically he said, there's lots of very talented people that came to work for me, but the ones that ultimately were the best were the ones that could get things done. And that there's a big difference between a very talented person and somebody who could get things done. Because if I hand them a project, a very talented person does a ton of work and comes back with whatever, a ton of work. The one who gets things done comes back with, oh, here, it's solved. And he can go think about the next thing. So as a person, earlier in your career, think about that in terms of what's the difference between, just doing the work versus like just making it very easy for the company you're working for because you've solved the problem for them. The other one is, I'd say, it depends on what you want as a career, but in general, when people ask me like how to make a decision in terms of their next role, I suggest looking at basically how fast the company is growing, because that's a sign that there's going to be new opportunities, new roles, things are changing, there's room for you to progress, and who your boss is. Are they the type of person that's going to look out for you and get you the opportunities you need? If those things are true, look, don't go somewhere that's going to pay you so little you can't pay your rent. That's a bad situation. But as long as you can pay your rent and your basic expenses, early in your career, I think those are the things that are going to give you the most learnings as fast as possible and set you up for a role that's much bigger later, potentially. So, sure, sometimes you have to make a decision for salary only because there's a reason you need to pay back your student loans or whatever it may be. But as much as possible, I'd say early in your career, try to take that out of it, because what ultimately sort of leads to the big differences in financial outcomes and in success is not, whether you made an extra few $1,000s in one role or another early in your career. It's, were you at the right type of company where you got the learnings? Did you have the right type of boss who helped you out?
Yeah, I think that is incredible advice. And one thing that I don't, the current generation entering the marketplace, because salaries are so much more public, I think there is this mentality of really just trying to go after whatever is the largest salary, which of course has its short-term benefits. But I do agree with you in that trying to, make sure that you make enough to survive, like that's a given. But beyond that, really choosing a company that's going to give you the experience, the exposure, working for, someone who's really going to help you thrive is so much more valuable than what the number is, and opens you up to much bigger numbers later in the career when, also from a life perspective, you typically need that larger salary with, kids and houses and all those sorts of things that generally happen when you're a bit later in your career, if you follow a more air quotes traditional path. So I think that is really, really helpful. And so my last question is along the same lines. We always talk about nothing changes if nothing changes. And I always like people to walk away from each conversation at Revenue Rehab with a takeaway. And so for those that are further in their career and, are thinking about what their next progression is, whether that's out of corporate and being a founder or, into some other role, what would be your one thing? How do you self-evaluate, or how do you figure out what that next right move? Any advice for those that are further along in their career?
Yeah, I mean, and this is going to be obvious, but I'll say it anyway. Be very intellectually honest with, what you want, what you don't want, what you're good at, what you're not. The people who get themselves into trouble are the ones that are kind of lying to themselves about what they want or what they can do. And then they end up in a bad situation. If you sort of or see all your friends get this thing and you fool yourself into believing that you want the same thing your friends want, well, it's not going to go well. So, on the other hand, if you really realize that what you're most, interested in doing next is, X size company, customer facing, certain types of roles, certain industries, like now you're zeroing in, if you care about having an office culture, you care about having a place where you have a lot of autonomy, like those are the types of attributes you should be thinking about, not is it the same thing all your friends are doing? Like, doesn't matter. So as long as you're being very intellectually honest, I think you can get yourself in a very good situation. Again and again, though, like I'll come back to, the people who I've seen just have really incredible career outcomes are the ones who, pick or happen to go to very high growth companies. It's hard to find those for sure, but it's not entirely unknown. The story I usually tell people is, when I left college, I had the opportunity to join, let's say one of them was Google. So I got offered a job at Google. And I said, Google, Google's not growing anymore. They're so big. They're 20,000 people. They're so big. And, I look back at that now and I think, what a boneheaded thing to think. Whether or not it's the right place for me to go, I don't know. But it was silly to think Google's so big, they're not going to keep growing. Like they're now 200,000 people or something. Don't quote me on that number, but they've, certainly 10x since then. Same with, Facebook and Apple and Netflix and whatever. So I guess what my point is that it's not unknown who are the very high growth, exciting companies. So if you really want that sort of biggest step up, go to those ones that are known, and they might be Series C, Series D, or maybe even a little later, but still growing, 60 to 100% a year, where you're going to get enormous amounts of learning. You don't have to go and find the unknown startup that no one's ever heard of and no one knows if it's going to work or not to get that experience. Certainly you can, and there can be even more learnings, but I'd say if you go too early, it's hard to know whether it'll succeed or not. And so it's a bit of a less certain bet. But so I guess, there's a lot of very clear winners that you can go work for that'll get you a lot of good experience.
Awesome. I appreciate that. And Alex, I have enjoyed our discussion, but that's our time for today. But before we go, how can our audience connect with you? And I know you also have a podcast, so I'd love the shameless plug for that as well.
Yeah, you did promise me I could make a shameless plug, so you're coming through. So, feel free to go to our site at regal.io or email me at hello@regal.io to learn more about how to use our software for these high velocity B2C sales teams. And then, separate from that, we do run a podcast, and please follow me on LinkedIn, and you'll learn more about the podcast.
Awesome. Well, we will make sure to link both to Regal and to your LinkedIn so that anyone that is interested can stay connected. So wherever you are listening or watching this podcast, take a look at the show notes so that you can stay connected with Alex. And also for other stories, pop back to episodes 35, 37, and 41. Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. I can't believe we're at the end. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to Revenue Rehab with your host, Brandi Starr. Your session is now over, but the learning has just begun. Join our mailing list and catch up on all our shows at revenuerehab.live. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at Revenue Rehab. This concludes this week's session. We'll see you next week.